is the ultimate horror experience, and when he presses play, the people on screen start watching him back. Because at Final Cut Video, the movie doesn't end when it's over. Welcome to Nightmare Proof, where true horror comes alive. Here, you'll hear real stories of the strange, the disturbing, and the unexplainable. Turn down the lights, get comfortable, and prepare to face the darkness. Something is off about the video rental store in my town. Let me just start out by saying that I love horror movies. I have fond memories of staying up late on weekends as a teenager, curled up with a blanket and a massive bowl of popcorn, completely captivated by what I was seeing on screen. The practical effects, the gore, the score, all of it was enough to make me a junkie for life. Back in the day, I hunted for my next fix at the local video rental store every Friday night after school. It was called Dead End Video, and it was my home away from home, complete with shitty lighting, incredible selections of candy, and shelves stacked to the ceiling wall to wall with VHS tapes and DVDs. Sadly, though, the world ended up moving on from Dead End Video. What was once a sanctuary for my younger self eventually became a vape shop. In the years since that place went out of business, I grew up, fell in love, fell out of it just as fast, worked a soul-sucking career path, and then eventually moved back here for a fresh start. That's the gist of what I told people. In reality, though, I was just spinning my wheels and stubbornly stuck in the past. Funnily enough, though, that's probably why the new video store even caught my eye in the first place. The shop itself was tucked between a now vacant donut shop and an H&R Block. The knife-shaped sign lit up with bright red neon. Final Cut Video. I thought it was a joke at first, because who in their right mind decides to open a video rental store in the year 2025? The windows to the place were tinted dark, and a sandwich board out front said, "Now open! Horror movies only! We've got what you're dying to see!" "We'll see about that," I muttered as I walked towards the door. I have always been kind of a purist when it comes to the horror genre. While everyone else moved on to streaming, I stuck with VHS. Something about the tracking lines, the warped colors, and the grain, despite all their faults, made the experience much more authentic. Watching film on tape is like seeing the images decay in real time. It delivers a grimy feel that other mediums don't. Over the years, I'd built up quite the collection. Rare slashers, obscure foreign titles, the kind of stuff that never made it to DVD. I used to trade with other collectors through various online groups back during the Wild West days of the internet. I was chasing down anything labeled unrated, uncut, or banned. Not for the shock value, but for finding the truth in the horror that felt too raw to be fake. Final Cut Video's interior looked like any horror fanatic's wet dream. The place had that movie popcorn aroma that hung in the air, and the shelves were littered with rows of classics and cult favorites, sorted by subgenre: slasher, supernatural, creature features, psychological, found footage, etc. Sleepaway Camp 1408 and Wreck were just some of the titles I saw as my eyes wandered around, taking in everything. Hell, there were even the odd bootlegs with photocopied cover arts among the more mainstream titles. The walls were adorned with movie posters I recognized, such as Jaws, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Shining, Tombs of the Blind Dead, and Let's Scare Jessica to Death. But there were also posters that looked like they were printed for straight-to-VHS titles. The images on them were off-center and very grainy. They didn't have any zinger taglines either, just names like The Barbaric Cruelties of the Necrocannibal, A Slaughterhouse by the Cemetery, and 3 on a Meat Hook. As I wandered the aisles, I noticed a couple of other customers in the store. There was a man in a long trench coat that lingered near the foreign horror section. Whenever I glanced at him, he would straighten immediately and pretend to be engrossed by a VHS cover. I couldn't help but feel like his eyes hadn't actually moved from me as I passed him. A crouched woman flipped through a stack of bootlegs on the lower shelves nearby. She seemed absorbed in what she was doing, but every so often her gaze lingered on me before she returned to her task. Further down one of the aisles, there was a young teen in a white hoodie. He was leaned against one of the shelf racks, his eyes on the Shining movie poster. Whenever I passed him, he shifted just enough for me to be in his line of day. Sight again. I sauntered towards the counter, where a tall and thin man with bleach blonde hair and an eyeball tattoo on his neck stood. He appeared to be in his mid-30s maybe, with an expression that rested between amused and blank. He wore a shirt with a faded image of the Child's Play 2 movie poster, and his Final Cut Video name tag said Fulci. "Evening," he said enthusiastically as I approached. "Is this your first time here?" "Yeah, I moved back here a while ago. I didn't think these kinds of places still existed, to be honest," I said as Fulci offered a short laugh. "We're specialty. We offer horror, and horror only. The good, the bad, and the downright ugly." He let that hang in the air like it was waiting for a 90s sitcom laugh track to play. "Cool," I said, playing off that awkward pause in the conversation. "I'm curious to see what you all have." He smiled just slightly as he held up 2 tapes, Pieces and the Poughkeepsie tapes. "All right, pop quiz. One's genius, one's garbage. Let's see if you pick right." "Trick question. They're both garbage. The difference is that one is brilliant garbage," I replied without hesitation. "Which one's the brilliant garbage, though?" "The Poughkeepsie tapes. Duh." He reached below the counter and then suddenly emerged, holding up another set of tapes. "Okay, Night of the Living Dead or Zombie? Which one of these do you respect more?" Romero's is a classic that birthed the zombie subgenre as we know it. But Zombie is beautiful chaos with tasteful gore. I'll have to give it to Romero, although I do love Fulci's work immensely. He grinned with delight at my answer. "A respectable opinion. Hey, Hooper, Roth, come up here. We got someone with taste." I turned to see 2 more clerks make their way towards the counter. The one whose tag said, Roth was a short, stocky man with a buzz cut, and he wore a moth-eaten Iron Maiden Power Slave hoodie. The other, clerk who had been meticulously organizing a stack of unlabeled VHS tapes, was thin as a coat rack, with choppy, uneven bangs that looked like she cut them herself with a knife. Her oversized cardigan hung off her like it belonged to someone much larger. The name tag attached to her cardigan read, Hooper, the letters appearing faded like they'd been scrubbed clean too many times. Fulci cleared his throat. "Now let me ask you this. Which is the better Dario Argento film? Suspiria or Inferno?" Suspiria is the only correct answer here. Argento crafted something truly masterful with that movie, and while Inferno is interesting, it's stylistically a mess. "Now that is bold," Fulci stated as Hooper and Roth nodded their heads in agreement. "Can I ask him a question?" Roth chimed in, his eyes meeting Fulci's, who signaled he could. "Okay, which do you prefer, Cannibal Holocaust or The Green Inferno?" I hesitated, mulling my answer over before stating what I believed was my most accurate opinion. Cannibal Holocaust. It's wrong in a lot of ways, but it's authentic in its approach and presentation, I guess. The Green Inferno to me feels like it's trying too hard. Roth's eyes seemed to reflect slight disappointment, but he gave a respectable nod before Fulci let out a delighted whistle. "Interesting. You're not scared off by the real stuff. That's good to know because not everyone can stomach that. All right, I have one final question. What's the scariest movie you've ever seen, purely for what it did to you?" I thought about it for a moment as Hooper's eyes lingered on me, studying me. It has to be The Thing, hands down. It's not just the practical effects of the creature, but the paranoia, the isolation, the creeping dread, and the way it makes you doubt everything around you. He leaned back with a satisfied smirk, letting a pause stretch uncomfortably. "Good. I think that tells me everything I need to know. You appreciate horror and see it for something beyond entertainment. You see it as an experience. You chase the raw, the obscure, the forbidden, and everything in between." He leaned closer, his elbows now on the counter, lowering his voice like we were about to talk about something illegal. "You're not like the others who come in here who just want to scream at jump scares. You chase the more extreme, am I right?" I gave a polite laugh, already writing him off as a guy who took his job too seriously. Still, there was something about Fulci. It wasn't that he was creepy, just that his demeanor resembled that of a doctor trying not to startle a patient before a diagnosis. I shrugged, unsure how to answer. "I guess I like what most people wouldn't bother with." He tapped a finger against the counter, his grin sharpening. You seem like someone who strays away from the norm. Do you prefer the kind of horror that twists your mind, or the kind of horror that leaves you unsettled long after the credits roll? I mostly prefer the ones that do manage to get under your skin. I'm a fan of the more psychological stuff, but I'm not one to shy away from gore as long as it serves a purpose, I admitted, not sure of where exactly the series of questions was headed. And the people on screen, do you pity and sympathize with them, or do you like to watch and see what humans are truly capable of? I don't know, honestly. I just watch the film, and I try to understand what the director is trying to convey with their filmmaking. It's not like I'd ever act out what I'm viewing myself, but that's where the fun begins, his eyes glinted in the dim light. The thought experiment of putting yourself in the victim's place, or maybe even being the one doing the less savory acts, is fun to think about. Most people flinch at the idea. I don't think you do. You seem to use your imagination, and that tells me a lot about... I'm not sure I want to know which role you find yourself thinking about more, I joked, trying to lighten the mood. If it makes you feel any better, it's 50-50. Fulci chuckled as he leaned back. His gaze swept the store. Now, how far would you go for the perfect horror experience that doesn't pretend? For a story that feels real? I don't know. I like scary movies that know what they are. Not like real-life horror, if that's what you're getting at. The line between fiction and reality is thinner than most think, Fulci said softly, almost contemplatively. Some chase the monsters on the screen, while others pursue the truth that makes the monsters. So, are you going to show me some movies or what? This is starting to weird me the hell out, my intrusive thoughts blurted out of my mouth. Fulci squinted his eyes, seemingly not liking the fact that I interrupted what he was saying. What I'm about to show you is something we don't normally show off to customers. He tapped the counter twice and waved a hand toward the back room. Roth walked back that way without a word. Hooper hadn't moved, but she was watching me intently, like she was waiting to see how I responded to what Fulci had said. We've got a private collection, Fulci continued. Stuff that's not on the shelves. They have no cover artwork or credits on IMDb. Technically, these are films that don't officially exist. You won't find these in any collector group either. Hooper chimed in. Her tone made her words seem like a dare. I raised a skeptical eyebrow. Are you talking bootlegs? What the hell do you have back there? An original work print of Begotten? Sure. Bootlegs. That's what we'll go with. Roth reappeared from the back room with maybe a dozen battered black clamshell cases and set them on the counter. There was no art on any of the VHS tape covers. Every single one of them were unmarked and unlabeled. Some appeared scratched, some had melted edges near the spool, and one was even crudely taped back together, like it had exploded in a VCR and someone had reassembled it out of spite. What they all had in common were white stickers in the middle of the tape with messy, handwritten text such as, "Until you see the eyes, Jeremy Vane was already in the trunk, and the victims carved in the bark." Fulci grabbed a couple of them and held them carefully, like he was handling bombs instead of tapes. These tapes are priceless pieces of the Final Cut collection. Fulci spoke reverently. Each of these is a one of one. There are no copies. These are one of a kind in many ways. They don't end when they're over. Cute line. I smirked as Hooper leaned in from her spot. No, he's serious. She held my gaze for a beat too long, then turned away. I nodded and continued to look over the assortment of tapes on the counter. My eyes quickly settled on a thin, plastic casing that looked like it had been left in the sun for too long. Someone had scratched a title into the edge with what looked like a needle. The incident in Summerbrook Forest. What's this one? I asked as I picked it up to study it. Fulci paused before answering. That one's a tough watch, to say the least. It's one that most have said is too visceral for them. They didn't have the stomach to make it all the way through. Y'all are acting like this is the tape from The Ring, I quipped, but it came out dry. But I don't mind a challenge. Is it cursed or something? Cursed is just a marketing term. The more apt description would be documentary adjacent. It's also Roth's favorite. Seriously? I asked Roth. He just nodded once and then stared at me like an NPC. I turned to Hooper. You can take it, she spoke quietly, but you have to watch it all the way through. All right, I'm sold. This will be tonight's movie, I said, deciding my rental right then and there. Hooper and Roth exchanged a glance and smiled like they'd just won a bet. Fulci rang me up at the register with an old, dusty cash drawer that clinked when it opened. He placed the tape gently in a wrinkled brown paper bag with no branding on it. As he handed the bag over, his fingers lingered for a second too long on mine. "Just remember, someone bled to make every one of these." I forced an awkward smile. "Right. I'll bring it back tomorrow." I said goodbye to the three clerks and stepped out into the night a minute later with the paper bag tucked under my arm. I didn't look back as I got in my car and made the drive home. Later that evening, I ordered Papa John's, grabbed a cold can of Dr. Pepper from my fridge, and popped the tape into the cheap combo VCR TV. I kept it around for nostalgia's sake. The VCR wheezed like an old smoker on its fifth pack of cigarettes for the day as the movie whirred to life on the screen. The first thing I noticed was the 70s grindhouse aesthetic of the film. It started without any credits, instead focusing on a handheld establishing shot of 6 teenagers drinking beers and laughing around a campfire. There was no music to be had, and the only lighting came from the natural light of the fire that crackled in the darkness. It felt like I was watching someone's home video that was left in a storage container somewhere. The voices of the teenagers were barely discernible. I couldn't really make out anything they were saying. One of them kept looking off into the trees in the direction of the camera, like they had heard something. It was uncanny viewing, but other than that, it seemed like a setup for your typical slasher flick. I wondered when the actual movie would start. As for the first 10 minutes or so, it was just the shaky camera stalking the teenagers from the tree line. Heavy breathing and quiet snickering could be heard from behind the camera. As one of the girls strayed away from the group, I think she said she had to go pee behind a tree or something. The camera followed her from afar, the leaves crunching and branches cracking beneath the camera wielder's feet. As the camera person got closer to the girl, I could hear a knife being unsheathed. The girl was tackled to the forest floor, causing the camera to fall to the ground. A large man overpowered her and plunged a knife deep into her throat. She didn't die right away. You could hear the labored wheezing coming from her throat as she tried to push the man off her, blood gushing from her wound. The camera didn't flinch as she choked on her blood, her limbs going limp. This didn't feel staged by a scream queen or a stuntman. This felt real. I pressed the pause button on the VCR and sat there for a while, staring at the warped image frozen on the screen. I couldn't decide if it was the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen or simply the most convincing horror film ever made. My brain kept trying to rationalize everything by saying, it's just underground filmmaking. Some people with a handheld camera and a knack for shock value. Eventually, I laughed it off and told myself that I was being overdramatic. I'd seen worse, right? It was just a movie, nothing more than harmless fun. That's what I kept repeating as I pressed play again. I watched as the scene changed to show the rest of the group had been tied up around the campfire. Their wrists were bound with duct tape, and they had burlap sacks pulled tightly over their heads. Their movements were sluggish. The muffled sobs under the fabric were picked up faintly by the camera as it was set down on the ground. I could hear the sound of the lens cap being unscrewed as someone was approached. A shadow moved almost out of frame. It was the cameraman's hand passing a handgun to someone off-screen. "Which one of your friends is first?" You could hear the smile in the voice that asked. The person holding the gun had finally stepped into view, their features half lit by the dying campfire. He looked familiar, but I couldn't figure out why. His breathing was loud and unsteady, clearly panicking at what he was about to do. He looked around at the figures surrounding the fire, pointed the trembling hand with the gun at one of them, and fired. Pop! The first shot echoed like a firecracker in the night. The head snapped back, and the body slumped sideways, collapsing to the ground. The next 2 shots came much quicker, and with less hesitation. Pop! Pop! Each of the burlap sacks turned dark at the top as blood poured through in slow, syrupy streams that dripped down into the dirt. The camera didn't flinch at the horrific act that had been committed, and no dramatic music or clever editing tricks changed what I had seen. The wind rustled the leaves in the nearby trees as laughter filled the air. Then, with no credits to signal the end, the tape clicked and Elle heard the noise of hissing static overtake my TV. I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure of what to feel about what I saw. I ejected the tape, but just sat there, holding it in my hand. I told myself that it was ridiculous to feel the way I did, but I couldn't help but feel unnerved. What kind of movie was this? I asked myself repeatedly as I turned off the TV, put the tape back into its case, and went to bed. I tossed and turned in bed, telling myself that the movie was just a really well-done underground film. It had to be one of those weird Eastern European things that never made it out of tape trading circles. That's what I wanted to believe, but a part of me didn't know what to believe exactly. I was just starting to drift off when I heard the quiet rustle of footsteps outside. I got up, pulled the curtains aside, and I felt my skin shudder. From my window, I could see maybe a dozen people just standing in the street, standing completely stationary as they watched my house. I couldn't make out any of their faces, but they all appeared to be wearing the same set of dark clothes. Their heads were tilted towards my window, like they were directly staring right at me. For what felt like an eternity, nobody moved. But then one of them slowly raised a hand and pointed straight at my window. I stumbled back from the window, scared out of my mind by what I was seeing. When I went to go look out my window again, though, they were gone and the street was completely empty. I got out of bed, walked towards the front door, and opened it, half expecting to catch some pranksters running away into the night. But no one was there. It was completely quiet outside except for the sound of faint whispers coming from somewhere nearby. I could hear numerous voices, all repeating the same words, like some kind of ritualistic incantation. "Did you watch it? Did you watch it?" The voices swelled to a chaotic crescendo as the crunch of gravel signaled approaching footsteps. I slammed the door shut and locked it, double-checking and triple-checking that it was locked before I turned off every light in the house. I backed away from the door, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But then, I heard knocking. It started off as a soft tap-tap-tap, before it gradually became a furious pounding of fists against the door. "Did you watch it?" The voices were right outside my door now, overlapping with each other to create a maddening chant. I could hear something that sounded like fingernails scrape against the doorframe amidst all the voices. Under the crack in the doorframe, I could see shadows moving and twitching in a frenzy. I backed toward the hallway, the doorknob rattling aggressively as I ran into my room and grabbed a baseball bat. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, brandishing the bat, trying to look intimidating. The only reply was a single whisper pressed right up against the front door. "Did you watch it?" Then just as suddenly as it started, it was over. The doorknob had finally stopped jerking, and it felt like the world was holding its breath. I stood there for what felt like an hour, listening for any sort of footsteps or whispers before I dared to peek through the peephole. I didn't see anybody, and the street seemed to be empty again. I went to the living room and sat on the couch with the bat in my lap, fully intending on waiting for the sun to rise. At 3:13 a.m., my phone buzzed on the table. I had forgotten I had left it out here. I was getting a call from an unknown number. I answered the phone to hear a familiar voice. "Did you watch it?" "Fulci, is this you? How the hell did you get my number? What are you doing calling me at this time of night? You already know why I'm calling. Yes, I watched it. Just what is going on? I feel like I'm losing my damn mind, and I need some answers. There's more where that came from. I'll be talking to you later." Then the line went dead. Immediately after, I began typing this up because I had to explain my story to someone. What do? I'm really weirded out by all of this. Maybe I've seen too many horror movies, but I can't help but feel like something strange is going on. I think I'm going to investigate this further. I have a feeling there's more to this video store than what's on the surface. I'll continue to make updates with what I find. Thank you for watching Nightmare Proof. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to keep the nightmares alive. Have a story of your own? Send it in, and you may hear it here next time. Until then, sleep well if you can.